I'm Megan Gibson. I'm the executive editor for foreign news at the New Statesman. And today we are here to talk about the special relationship. Is it still special? We're looking specifically at US-UK relations in the era of Biden and Brexit, but I think you'll see quickly we might go a little bit off-piste. So joining me today is Benn, MP. He's been the MP of Leeds Central since 1999. He's the former Foreign Secretary. Shadow Foreign Secretary, apologies. Don't want to get that wrong. In 2016, he was elected chair of the Exiting the European Union Select Committee, and subsequently was chair of the Select Committee on the Future Relationship with the European Union. And he is currently co-convener of the UK Trade and Business Commission. We have Sir Robin Niblett, who is the director and chief executive of Chatham House, positions you've held since 2007. Before joining Chatham House, Robin was the executive vice president and COO of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He is currently co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on Geopolitics. And we have Professor Sarah Churchwell. And Sarah is professor of American literature and chair of Public Understanding of the Humanities, School of Advanced Study at the University of London. She's the author of a number of books, including Careless People, Murder, Mayhem, and the Invention of the Great Gatsby, America, A History of America First and the American Dream, and The Wrath to Come, Gone with the Wind, and the Lies America Tells. Her journalism has been widely published, not least in the New Statesman, and in 2021, she was longlisted for the Orwell Prize for Journalism. So thank you all for joining me. To start off, I'm going to have each of you give some brief opening remarks to just say where you think the most pertinent areas of discussion when it comes to the UK and US special relation is in 2022. So why don't we start with you, Hilary?
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. We have this long shared history between our two countries. I'm half American, as it so happens. We've had war, alliance, dispute, expressing our national interest, and we always come back to the things that bring us together in terms of shared values. And in history, I would say at the moment the echoes of Brexit continue to be heard. The bill that we discussed in the House of Commons yesterday, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, I got up and said, this bill proves that Brexit certainly isn't done, and it's a question on which President Biden and a lot of people in Congress have very, very strong views because of the historic importance of the Good Friday Agreement, which was the result of astonishing collaboration and courageous political leadership. So I would identify that. Obviously dealing with Russia in its new form and its war in Ukraine. And then you get onto China, climate change. I mean, there's no shortage of things which are going to challenge all of us at a very troubling time. And I look across the Atlantic Ocean at a country which clearly is incredibly divided. And that worries me. I'm sure it worries many of us who are here today.
Same question for you.
I suppose I'll just focus on the foreign policy side exclusively, just for the moment, and say that is the relationship still special? Yes, it just inevitably is, and certainly in any environment in which security is particularly important, then the relationship will be special because there are some unique forms of cooperation in nuclear weapons, in intelligence, in military deployment, that make it so, irrespective of who's in number 10 or, for that matter, in the White House. And I think the UK came up with this integrated review March a year ago, which really actually emphasised the importance of European security, called Russia out as the most acute threat. In a way, the integrated review kind of aligned this government with the Biden administration in many ways, and also sort of backed it up on what was called the Indo-Pacific tilt, this idea that Britain would take a bit more seriously America's concerns in the Indo-Pacific about the rise of China, and some few steps were taken in that area. One of the most notable being this AUKUS deal, the Australia, UK, US deal on defense technology sharing. But if you look at the Biden administration and where the Johnson administration is on the big topics, climate change, Iran, China, they're pretty much aligned. And a big difference, obviously, from under Donald Trump. I would say, however, the politics are what the politics are. And Boris Johnson is deeply distrusted by the Biden administration as an individual, as a politician. And also partly because Brexit was seen as an act of self-harm to the transatlantic relationship, and still is. And the Northern Ireland Protocol is this sort of constant sore at the heart of it, which could end up then weakening the transatlantic relationship as it deals with Ukraine, which obviously is the place in which the UK has shown itself once again to be very close to the US with all of the pre-intel and so on. But I think the big questions about the future, and just two things on that to talk about later. I think it's certainly, as long as Biden's in the White House, there's a chance of or any Democrat, a chance of a closer US-EU relationship that we are inevitably, as Brits, excluded from, because it will be around geoeconomic issues, technology, trade and transfer, and it might be over carbon border adjustment mechanisms or whatever. And the UK is going to be outside that. On the other hand, you could have a Trumpian type of leadership in the White House in 3-4 years, if that were to happen. And where would that leave the UK? I don't think it would leave the UK in a better place, to be frank. I think it would find itself more isolated at that point. So, yeah, lots to talk about.
Sarah, I know you have some thoughts on that last point, so...
Yeah, I do. So I'll just say a couple of things. I mean, first I would just add on to what Sir Robin was saying, that I don't think it's just the case that Boris Johnson is distrusted by the Biden administration, although I certainly think that that's true. But he is also actively disliked. And he's disliked... No, this is a serious point. I'm not making a flippant point. And he's disliked because of the way that they perceive him to have been racist in his treatment of Obama. And I'm not adjudicating that, but I'm telling you that that is widely reported. And both Biden and Kamala Harris feel that way about Boris Johnson, and that's a problem. So that's the, so there's that. I've been debating, I told everyone on the panel before this that I have a story about Chicago, and where I come from. I come from Chicago, and Chicago and the special relationship, and I wasn't sure if I was going to tell it, but I think I will tell my story. Hillary wanted me to tell my story. And I tell it because to the point about whether we will always have a special relationship or have always had a special relationship or come back to it. In 1928, the mayor of Chicago, Big Bill Thompson, who was the most corrupt mayor in Chicago history, which is quite a race to the bottom. It takes a lot to be that, but he was. And he ran for mayor on an America First campaign, 1927, 1928. I say this, first of all, to show how old America First is, but for people who know about that slogan, they may think that that meant that he was running on a nativist campaign. It was specifically an anti-British America First campaign. And the anti-British campaign was, he said that King George, there was a conspiracy theory that was long-standing, it went back to the 1880s, that Britain was trying to reclaim its colonies, and that there was this plan to take America back, and that one of the ways that that was going to happen was by planting pro-British propaganda in the public schools. And so Bill Thompson ran on an America First platform that said, and his slogan was, "Keep King George out of the public schools," which I think it might have been, come as a surprise to King George that he was trying to get into the public schools. But he kept saying, he was telling reporters that he would punch King George on the snoot if he came over to Chicago. So I think it's a funny little story, but the point is that and that was 1927, right? So 28. So that was less than a century ago. He successfully campaigned for the mayor of the second largest city in America on an anti-British platform, on a specifically anti-British platform. The special relationship comes and goes, but the way that we understand it is very much a post-war artifact, and it is contingent historically. So my view is that I don't think it's going to look the way that it has looked my whole life for very much longer. I think that there are many reasons for that, the most important of which is that the United States doesn't look the way that it has looked my whole life anymore. It is increasingly looking like, even under a Biden administration, like a rogue state we certainly have a rogue Supreme Court, an activist Supreme Court. I don't have to tell you all what's been happening there, but as an American woman, I'm not going to talk about the United States today without mentioning that elephant in the room. And I think that in terms of the Good Friday Agreement, I agree that that's very, very important to the current state of play between the US and the UK. I think one can't ignore it. Another elephant in the room, if you like. And I just want to address, to that point, one common misperception that I've heard over here a lot, which is that people assume that any trade agreement between the U.S. and the U.K. And that's been, Biden has said that he won't pursue the trade agreements that the Johnson government wants, if anything is going to endanger the Good Friday Agreement. But the key thing to know is that the Constitution makes very clear that any foreign trade bill is originated in the House, not by the president. And that means right now it's Nancy Pelosi's decision, not Joe Biden's decision. And it is explicitly. It's down to her leadership and her caucus, and she decides whether to put that forward or not. Now, she has also said that she will not do a single thing that jeopardizes the Good Friday Agreement. And it's very important that people realize how strong the Irish-American constituency remains in American politics, how important a vote it is. They are not going to alienate Irish-American voters. But also, Biden himself, he's one of those Americans who thinks he's Irish, right? So he says, I'm Irish. I know this because my father's the same kind of American, and he also announces that he's Irish. I'm like, no, you're really not, Dad. But okay. I think the Irish think it's cute, so it's okay. But in a very important way, they identify with that peace agreement. They think it's very, very important. But we have midterms coming up very, very soon. And the Democrats at the moment look poised to take a bath. Now, we'll have to see what happens with the reaction to the Roe decision, whether that is sufficient to motivate the Democrats to come out in the midterms. There's some noise suggesting that maybe it will, and maybe that will change the picture. But they'll have to come out in the right places to shift the electoral map. And at the moment, it's looking like the Republicans will take over. And if that is true, then that changes the calculus again. And it may not be a priority for them in the same way. So we will have to see what happens. But my suspicion is that with both countries very much increasingly going to be preoccupied by internal chaos, particularly, as I say, the U.S. But as an American living here, I'm certainly well aware of the turmoil that continues domestically here as well, and the political turmoil. I just don't think there's going to be much energy for a special relationship. They will rely on it as much as they can, I think, and try to take it for granted. But I foresee estrangement, a comparative estrangement, coming sooner rather than later.
So would you say that the longevity of the special relationship relies on a less partisan, more stable U.S.?
Yeah, I think it probably does. I think that because as I say, so sure, there are those cultural bonds, and those do go deep. And our government is based on your government with bicameral House. I said you're Canadian. But I'm British. So there are ways in which the structures and the bonds are very deep and very real, and of course the language. And for many, many people, their heritage, although of course by no means even a majority of Americans. But the geopolitical special relationship is quite contingent. And as everybody starts, continues to splinter in the way that they have been. And as I say, as the two societies become domestically more unstable, politically unstable, I just think that relationship is going to continue to be tested. And my point in telling my little Chicago story is that it's not quite as durable as I think that we tend to think it is. It is easy to imagine. For me, it's easy to imagine a situation where, it sounds silly to us now, but it's not too hard to imagine a conspiracy theory that is slightly less absurd but moves in similar directions, and that kind of ancient anti-British animus can also be stimulated probably without too much trouble, especially in a xenophobic nation generally.
And either of you, do you have thoughts on the necessity of a stable U.S.?
I was going to say just one thing very quickly. I think there's often an anti-American animus in the UK as well.
Yeah.
So even on parties that were pro-Brexit, if you look at where Nigel Farage stood, quite often a scepticism about parts of America and then a love of another part of America, as in Donald
part.
Trump.
You like that part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's entirely possible and easy for a spinning up of mutual animosity, as you said, in a time of deep internal reflection. But Vladimir Putin is doing a lot to bury those issues. And Congress is particularly bipartisanly anti-Putin, and Britain is seen as reliably on the right side of that battle. Under Boris Johnson, to be frank, it doesn't depend on this Prime Minister at all. But that kind of holds what I would call the tactical special relationship together. I agree with you, it's not deeply political in a way, but it is tactically incredibly important around those security elements. And I think actually that even goes beyond the changing face of America internally and the changing face of Britain, which has changed a lot as well. There's a kind of utility to that aspect of it.
Yeah, the fact that Boris Johnson is widely distrusted, join the club around the world, but he will, fingers crossed, be temporary. When one reflects on the hundreds of years of relationship, there really have been ups and downs, and that's the point that Sarah made. But there are many things that still, I think, bind us together. One of my big worries is how democracies function in the age of conspiracy theories and social media. Because if you reflect on what's happened in the United States in the last 2 or 3 years, when, according to the polls, 70% of Republicans believe that Donald Trump won the election. Now, I'm rather old-fashioned, and it's why I'm opposed to electronic forms of voting. Because you walk into that count and you shut your eyes, you hear the rustle of paper and the sound of furrowed concentration, if there is a sound, and you watch the piles. And in the end, it's dead easy to know who won, because this pile's bigger than this one. Now, how do you operate in a democracy where the result of the outcome, which is an ascertainable fact, is disputed by one party? And that's part of the division that is so difficult. You look at COVID, the conspiracy theories that were around then, the people who wrote to me and other MPs and said Bill Gates is trying to inject a microchip into all of our arms. I wanted to get one of those little vials, shake it up to the light and say, I can't see the microchip. Could you just point out where it is? But this makes politics harder. And that's a challenge particularly for all democracies. But I agree very much with what you said, Robin, about what President Putin has chosen to do has really reminded people where their common interest is. And the United States has been really good in providing material and support to President Zelensky, as has the United Kingdom. And I think that will overcome. I'm not quite as pessimistic maybe as you are, Sarah. I think that will overcome who's in the White House and number 10 at any particular moment in time.
Do you think the UK is still too overly reliant on the US for security and defence, and the EU as well? I mean, we really see the US, and this is a very big Donald Trump talking point, that everybody needs to step up and spend more and contribute more and, carry their fair share weight. But when we see the direction and signs the direction that the US is going, should that cause the UK any worries or concerns about, standing back from the special relationship in terms of security, defense, military alliances?
Well, certainly when you have a US president that is kind of pulling back, because again, America has had these periods of being very involved in the world and then retrenching, and then you think of how they came into the First and the Second World War. But we are reliant on the United States of America because it's a fact.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It is the world's greatest military power now. China, the sleeping giant, is a huge challenge. But one of the consequences of Putin's decision to invade is two astonishing things happen. One is the European Union, for the first time in history, decided to spend money on buying weapons for a non-member state. And the second was Olaf Scholz made that speech in which he said, well, I'm going to increase Germany's defence spending to 3%, because Germany, because of its history, has had an army but has not been involved in military operations of the type that we are talking about. And so that has come as a great shock. It's changed opinion in Sweden and Finland about NATO membership. So all President Putin's nightmares have come to pass when he probably thought, if I do this, there'll be a few more sanctions. Europe's divided, because when Brexit happened, he just went fab. Yeah. Europe is divided. And I mean, the great myth of Brexit is it will lead to a trade deal with the United States of America. And, well, that is receding into the distance. And anyway, our biggest trading partner in the world is the United States of America without having a trade deal. Yeah. So in what way did our membership of the European Union prevent us from trading with the US? It didn't. This is one of the many Brexit myths that are coming home to bite us.
I think you know, if Donald Trump turned up right now and looked at what Europe is up to...
Please, no!
I mean, serious?
Sorry.
He had that moment where he said, I think quite fairly, to be honest, to Europeans, so you're asking us to spend X percent of GDP on defence while you import, to defend you from Russia, while you import the energy from Russia, and you're spending 2%. Sadly, it was a fair criticism. Yeah. But today, that isn't the case anymore. And what's happened is actually Europe is cutting off heavily, and probably, I think, for a very long time, its dependence on, and this includes the UK to a more minor level, on European, on Russian oil and gas. So that's changed. And Europe is spending more on defence. So this kind of idea that in a way, America's having to carry Europe isn't quite the way it was after Ukraine. Another very important point, we now rely on America heavily for our energy. And that's a new linkage, or a recreated linkage, but definitely a new one. America didn't used to export oil and gas, now it does. The UK is becoming actually one of the main reprocessing plants or areas for liquefied natural gas that's being brought not just from the Gulf, but also from America, which will then be going into Europe. Yeah. So there's a weird new sort of symbiotic relationship economically being created between America and that. The Americans now need Europe, as they did in the Cold War, as the front line in a way for their new conflict with Russia. They don't want the Russians, obviously, seeing America as the front line. And then in the other flip, they also need Europe to take on China. Because in the end, if China has not just Russia and the rest of the world to trade with, but a very good relationship with Europe, then it's very hard for China to manage it. But there is a sort of, again, a need, you could say, for American China policy to have Europe and the UK on side. So this is why, again, I think just geopolitically, we're being chucked back together again, despite all of these changes sociologically and so on. The geopolitics are kind of squidging us back together again, awkwardly perhaps, but yeah.
Do you see the special relationship improving if there was, say, Prime Minister Starmer?
Well, I don't know that. I feel like this are the kind of things that I would defer to the head of Chatham House and a sitting MP as a professor of literature. But just off the, instinctively, yes, I think it would. And I think that if you imagine a Biden-Starmer conversation, you just instantly start to see that everything would be, a little more evidence-based, and that might be helpful, and that it would be that without wanting to be invidious and recognizing, to use an American word, as we said earlier, that this is a bipartisan crowd. I will say that certainly from my point of view, with Starmer and Biden, whatever their shortcomings may be, they're both fundamentally grown-ups, and so you know that you're having a grown-up conversation. And when you put Trump and Johnson in a room, you're not having a grown-up conversation, right? And I think that's a fair statement. I mean, yes, my politics are clear, but I think that's a fair statement. So yes, I think it would have to strengthen it. But as I say, I will defer to the political experts next to me.
Yes.
What's the Starmer majority? Would be my question.
That's what
Who's in the coalition, if there is one? What are their attitudes to transatlantic relationship? How much a division is there in the Labour Party? I just had those points, but I agree with the basic thrust.
And Starmer, PM, President Trump.
Well, look, I mean, the reason why I started laughing at the idea, and it was not because of the serious point that Robin was making, because I was just, starting to think about all the ways in which I would hurt him if he was actually in front of me. The question of what would happen globally if Trump gets back into the United States, I think, is really kind of unfathomable. Because it will absolutely, we barely survived, and I say globally, not just the United States, barely survived 4 years of a Trump presidency. what would happen at that point? All bets would be off, because the United States, as we know it, and you're saying it will remain the world's biggest military power, and it is still an economic superpower, and yet it will be a rogue state at that point. It will, under Trump again, it will be a rogue state. It may already be one, with just the Supreme Court and Congress, if that flips and basically makes Biden a lame duck. So, but if Trump gets back in, I mean, honestly, all bets are off.
It would force potentially UK and the EU, even under Boris Johnson, if he was still Prime Minister, to try to bury their own hatchet.
Yeah.
And that, so there would be a whole sort of
domino
set
effect, right?
of effects around it to try to insulate from the instability that comes there, which is part of what I think British foreign policy should be about right now, by the way, is hedging, which is why the whole idea of sort of strengthening up the G7, getting maybe some more countries more regularly involved with this coordination becomes important, because at some point, you're going to need some structure to carry stuff forward if America isn't engaged the way it is right now, which would happen.
I mean, Brexit is the expression of a Britain First policy. Yeah. That's what it was all about. And the thing about those who argued for Brexit as the consequences become clear, and it's a slow unfolding story, is I've yet to meet anyone who argued for Brexit who's prepared to take any responsibility whatsoever for the consequences of the policy that they advocated. It's either, well, we haven't had a proper Brexit, or it's somebody else's fault. There have been times when I've been accused of being personally responsible for the failings of the Northern Ireland Protocol. I've got many things wrong in my life, but that is not one of them. And the government is being, really quite dangerous, and we saw that. You should have seen Theresa May's speech yesterday. She absolutely pulled this bill apart with great force and wonderful analysis, because it does break international law. And is it going to work? I don't think so. And the only way to solve the problems, I mean, actually, the relationship is being laid low at the moment in an argument about sandwiches, cuts of meat, seed potatoes, parcels, organic food. And surely when we've got a war in Ukraine, when we have the climate change crisis, the movement of people around the globe that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue in this century, we can find a way through politics. But I'm afraid, the UK government and the EU are like a squabbling, divorcing couple. You don't talk to me, no, you don't talk to me. And my colleague, Peter Carr, made the wonderful point yesterday. Politics was able to negotiate this extraordinary political achievement called the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. When I was growing up in London, if you told me that Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley would sit side by side as Deputy and First Minister of a power-sharing government in Northern Ireland, and I've said, I'd love to think it was possible, but I won't see it in my lifetime. It happened. And if we can do that through political negotiation, are you seriously telling me, he said, that we can't negotiate for a prawn sandwich to cross the Irish Sea without a lot of accompanying paperwork? And when you put it like that, I thought it was a wonderful analogy. Your politicians get together, do your job, sort it out.
On that note, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining.